Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is Monday, February 15th, 2016, and we have a lot of material to try to go through tonight. We're going to try to discuss Syria, discuss the elections. We've got, of course, Hillary Clinton material to try to get out. The European rape crisis, we want to address that as well, and, of course, a number of other topics that, let's be honest, we're not going to have time to get to all of that tonight, but we're going to try nevertheless. Now, for those of you who are just joining us tonight for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV, and that is when the new broadcast is aired every week, and it's also rebroadcast throughout the week, so we encourage you to check out the rebroadcast as well. Now, you can get the show's personal webpage here at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page, you'll find the archives, the YouTube videos, the chat room is going to be, actually, there's a chat room on the UCY homepage, but you'll find the archives and the YouTube videos and the links to my more recent articles on ucy.tv/TT. If you're interested in my work, you can find it at activistpost.com. You can find it at naturalblaze.com and eraofwisdom.org. I'm now contributing to that website as well. So we've done a number of articles for them, for Activist Post, and for Natural Blaze. So please check those out. Now, if you're interested in my work specifically, then I highly encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com. That is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archives, everything that's relevant to what I do is there at BrandonTurbeville.com. And I highly encourage you to check that out. That website also has links to my books, has links to the radio show, has contact information, bio information. All of that stuff is there. And, of course, we've made a lot of improvements. The site looks so much better now. A lot of extra things on the site. You can translate the site. You can donate. You can find links to other sites. So it's also set up where you can find a lot of good, reliable information throughout the alternative media there as well at BrandonTurbeville.com. Now, before we begin into anything in depth, I guess we should address the elections, right? We've now had two primaries. Well, we've had the caucus in Iowa. We've had the primary in New Hampshire, where Ted Cruz for the Republicans took the lead in Iowa, despite the fact that there was much chicanery, well, not really despite the fact, but because of the fact that there was much chicanery on the part of the Cruz campaign. It does appear that Cruz won it, but the methods through which he won it have many people questioning his tactics. Now, of course, the Hillary Clinton victory in Iowa, that's something else. It appears that Bernie Sanders actually won Iowa, if we were fair about this, but what about the Clintons is ever fair? This is clearly an effort to make sure that the Wicked Witch of the West becomes the Emperor of the United States, or the Empress of the United States. And I guess we could spell Empress with an I in this case. But nevertheless, there's evidence that Bernie Sanders did, in fact, win Iowa. We can look at the video evidence of fraud. It's vote fraud, not voter fraud, but vote fraud, where the precinct captains were counting more people coming in for Hillary Clinton. They were not counting the people who were leaving for Hillary. They weren't counting other people coming in for Bernie Sanders. And so it was skewed in favor of Hillary Clinton. And true to form, just as their fearless leader would have done himself, the Bernie Sanders camp rolled over, stuck their tail between their legs, and gave up without a fight. So Hillary Clinton was victorious in Iowa. Bernie did well in Iowa, though, so she was only ahead by about one delegate. And then on to New Hampshire. What do we have in New Hampshire? We had Trump winning in New Hampshire. That was expected. We had Bernie Sanders winning by a sizable margin in New Hampshire. But, of course, because of the corrupt mechanisms of the Democratic Party and all the little pieces that they have put in place to make sure that that the Party is as far from democracy as it could possibly get, Hillary Clinton gets these stupid superdelegates. If that's not an example of how the party has actually created a system in which it is designed to make sure that the establishment candidate always gets through every time, look at the name superdelegates. Look at what a superdelegate actually is. And now we come to South Carolina. And this is where we're going to have a number of things to say. Now, the next primary for the Democrats is in Nevada. The next primary for the Republicans is here in South Carolina. And then, of course, there's going to be a Republican caucus in Washington. There's going to be then the Republican caucus in Nevada, and then the Democratic primary. So this is going to be a kind of a different type of year, because these are all going to be a bit scattered. But what's come to mind for me when I discuss the election process and how all of this stuff is taking place, that so many of you just do not have a grip or a grasp on what a primary is and what a caucus is and how this works. And so before we really get into anything in terms of geopolitics, I feel that we really need to have a civics lesson. So Civics 101 is about to begin. I have so many people asking me, when you talk about the primaries and the general elections, when you say that there's the Democratic primary coming up and the Republican primary and you have to vote in one, they get upset. They say, wait a minute, I don't want to vote. I don't want to become a Democrat. I don't want to become a Republican. I don't want to have to pick one or the other. So they don't go vote, or they fully don't understand the process, or they think that if they vote for Bernie Sanders in February in the primary, they have to vote for Bernie Sanders in the general, and that's not the case. So we're going to try to clarify that for people who may have missed out on the civics lessons, and to some degree that's not your own fault. The education system is they're too busy teaching you how to put a condom on a banana as opposed to actually teaching you how your country works. So we're going to try to do some of that right now. Not the condom on the banana, but teaching you how the country works. So the primaries, of course, what you have in this country is this alleged two-party state, right? The idea that there are actually two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Of course, we have these third parties that are essentially amount to nothing anymore. The Libertarians, the Greens, the Peace and Freedom, all this kind of stuff. It amounts to nothing. But in practical terms, you have a two-party state. We all know at this show, we all know that this two-party state is actually a one-party state with two sub-parties with simple branding mechanisms to get different people with different pedigrees into that system. But these parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, have primaries. This is not the presidential election, right? This is the primary. In fact, the Libertarians and the Greens have these types of primaries as well, but they don't get the attention that the Republicans and Democrats get, obviously. So all a primary is an in-house selection process where the party decides amongst its members what candidate or which candidate they're going to select for nomination to run in the general election. Now, the general election is, of course, what you see when you have John Kerry versus George Bush, Barack Obama versus John McCain, Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney, Republican versus Democrat. That's the general election. The primary is in-house, right? That's when you have Mike Huckabee, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and on the other side you have Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So it's in-house selection. And how this works is generally on a set date. They're generally on the same date, although this is being changed a bit this year. You have the opportunity to go to a caucus or to vote. Now, a caucus is it's generally a closed primary, and the difference between an open and a closed primary is this: a closed primary, as I just described, a primary election as an in-house selection process, right? So a closed primary means that only members of the Democratic Party, only people who have signed up, joined up, paid their fees, whatever, are members of the Democratic Party can vote in the Democratic primary, and the same for the Republicans, right? Only actual Republicans who are members of the party can go and vote in the Republican primary. If you're someone who's not associated with either party, like me or like most of you, then you couldn't vote. Now, if it's an open primary, and that's what we have here in South Carolina, that means that members of the Democratic Party can go vote in the Democratic primary, and the general public, people like me, can go vote in the Democratic Party primary. So, in fact, members of the Republican Party can vote in the Democratic primary as well, because it's an open primary. It's for everybody. Everybody can go in there and vote. That being said, so that's closed primaries and open primaries. Caucuses are closed primaries because you have a limit to the amount of people that can participate in a caucus. It's really outdated, and they should be done away with, as well as the electronic voting machines. But it's a lot. It's people get together, they move around, they try to convince other candidates who didn't make the cut to come support their side. It's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot more active. It involves people sitting on different sides of the room and raising their hands. It's not quite as exact, but that's why it's closed. Primaries, however, New Hampshire was a primary. That is, it can be closed or open. New Hampshire was somewhat of a mix, to be honest. Nevada is going to be a closed primary because it's a caucus, and South Carolina, again, will be an open primary. And once those decisions are made throughout the country and the nominees are selected, they then go to the general election, right? That's, again, where you see the Democratic nominee versus the Republican nominee. And it doesn't matter how you voted in the primary. If you voted Republican in the primary, you can vote Democrat in the general, or Republican. If you voted Democrat in the primary, you can vote Democrat or Republican in the general election. It doesn't matter. So I had to go through that because I think so many people are very confused and are actually angry at many times when they go to vote in the primary and they're told they have to pick one or the other. The reason you can't vote in both the Democrat and Republican primaries, that's the other thing I should point out. You can pick one. You can go vote in the Democratic primary, you can go vote in the Republican primary, but you can't do both. And the reason is fairly simple, right? Because if you go to vote in the Democratic primary and you're a Democrat, you can pick the Democratic candidate of your choice, and then you could go over to the Republican side and pick the one that you think would do worst against the guy that you actually wanted to win. So essentially you get to vote twice. And so that's why that's not allowed. That's actually reasonable. So to look at the Democratic and the Republican primaries, just look at them as an in-house selection process. Now, with that being said, we have this question in the South Carolina primaries. Again, this is an open primary. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party have opened their doors to the general public and said, probably not wisely, but said that you can come in and you can vote for whoever you would like to see running as the nominee for our party. It's open. They've essentially opened the door to the general public to influence the nomination. And on February 20th, we will have the Democratic Nevada caucus, the Republican Washington caucus. Those are both closed, so unless you're Democrats or Republicans, you can't participate. But on February 20th, we'll have the South Carolina Republican primary. That's where you vote, and that is open. On February 23rd, we'll have the Nevada caucus for the Republicans. That's closed because it's a caucus. On February 27th, we will have the Democratic primary in South Carolina, and that is open. That is an open primary. And I would argue that this is by far the most important primary. right? The Democratic primary is more important right now than the Republicans, and I'll tell you why. In 2 words, Hillary Clinton. That's why it's the most important. Hillary Clinton is, without a doubt, the establishment's pick for the post of President of the United States. I've written a book on her, the difference it makes, 36 reasons that Hillary Clinton should never be president. And you can go check that book out for free on BrandonTurbeville.com. I encourage you to do so and take a look. It's not just 36 reasons. It's all I could fit in the book and get it out before the general elections. But right now what we're facing is this question of whether or not Hillary Clinton will get the Democratic nomination. And Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire, and I argue won Iowa, despite himself. The guy's winning despite the fact that he's spiking the football at every chance that he gets. And this is not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders, by the way. I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan. Now, we've taken to calling him Bernie the Bomber for actually supporting Saudi Arabia and Israel and the stupid monkey rebels in Syria who are raping and beheading their way across a civilized country. We're not in favor of Bernie's economic solutions, right? His economic solutions of democratic socialism. Well, we're against socialism in all its forms here, whether you can call it democratic or just full-on socialism. We're not in favor of that. We're more in favor of the American system of economics that stands in opposition to socialism. Free tuition for people who earn it's not a bad idea. We can pay for that with a 1% Wall Street sales tax if we need to. Free health care for everybody. We don't need to raise payroll income tax, Bernie. We can do that with a 1% Wall Street sales tax. We can also nationalize the Fed and use 0% interest credit to do that, to do many other things as well, rebuild infrastructure and bring industry back here by ending free trade, for one thing. So, we're not a fan of Bernie Sanders by any means, and we're never going to endorse Bernie Sanders. But what we are saying is that Hillary Clinton should not be allowed to be president, and we have an opportunity to intervene here. This is not an endorsement of any candidate, but if you so feel the need to vote, some of these primaries are open, right? March 1st is going to be Super Tuesday, and that's where we're going to have, I'll give you a list of the states that are open primaries for the Democrats. That's Alabama, and of course American Samoa. You can actually get some delegates there, and that's open. Arkansas is open. Georgia is open. Minnesota is a caucus, but it's actually open. It's an open caucus, and that's pretty rare. Tennessee is open, Texas, Vermont, Virginia. Of course, we have, who else do we have here that's an open primary? That's the Republican side. Let's see. We have Michigan, which is open. Mississippi is open. We have Illinois, Missouri, Virgin Islands is open. American Samoa has the Republican convention. That's not relevant. Arizona is closed. I'm sorry. Wisconsin is open, and Indiana is open. I think there may be a couple of more. Again, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico is open primaries. Montana is open primaries, etc. So, essentially, what you've been given is an opportunity. If you're in those states that I've listed, you've been given an opportunity by the Democratic Party to come in. You don't have to join the party. I can't stress that enough. You don't have to join the party to vote in those primaries that I just listed. All you have to be is registered to vote. So you just go in and you vote against Hillary Clinton. We're trying to keep her from getting the nomination. Now, after that, of course, the general election comes up. It's Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump. It's Bernie Sanders versus Ted Cruz. Bernie Sanders versus Marco Rubio. Whatever. You stay home. Don't participate in that. We don't want to choose the lesser of two evils, but sometimes there is an evil that is so repugnant that we try to prevent that evil from getting the Democratic nomination. So that's an avenue that's open to you if you want to take part in it. I'm not encouraging you to go out and choose the lesser of two evils here, although it might sound like I'm doing that. I am suggesting that this is an avenue that you could try to fire a shot at the establishment and at least try to prevent Hillary Clinton from getting the nomination. Of course, we know that Bernie Sanders could win most of those states and still not get the nomination because of these damn superdelegates in the Democratic Party. Well, then that will simply show once again that the system itself is rigged, and that will only help our case. But again, I can't state this enough. This is not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders. We're not a fan of Bernie. We don't want Bernie, but we don't want Hillary either. And again, we're not trying to choose the lesser of two evils. This is not a Bush-Gore situation or an Obama-Mitt Romney situation. This is simply trying to get in and infiltrate the party system as much as possible to prevent Hillary Clinton, the establishment choice, from getting the nomination. You never want to let an oligarch fight you on his own terms. So they want Hillary, give them somebody else. And then you can sit out in the general election, and let's make a point in the general election that we're not interested and we're not going to participate. But we have to be smart, street smart, about what decisions we make and when we do it. Now, enough on that. We need to get into the Syria situation as quickly as possible. Although I would want to step back just briefly and point out, to clarify something I just said. While the Democratic Party and the Republican parties have cracked open the doors to the general public to influence the nomination process, and I encourage you to take advantage of whatever methods that you have to affect change, however small and fleeting they may be, it's literally the least you can do. I would also say that when the general election rolls around, it is important to not vote for the presidency at this point. You may go vote for local issues that are on the ballot, state elections if someone is worthy of voting for, but we are looking at the primaries as an opportunity to influence the in-house selection process. We're not looking at that as any kind of participation in the fraud election process that we have here in this country. We're looking at it as an opportunity to influence, or not to really even influence, but to sabotage the political parties. We're not looking at it as an endorsement of any candidate. So in the general election, when that rolls around, it would be wise to stay home unless you have some type of local issue, something on the ballot, some type of GMO labeling, marijuana law, something like that, to go out and vote for. At that point, then you're on the rolls, the voting machine, either not vote for president, write someone in, something to that effect. Maybe vote for a third party or something if you really want to, although the third parties that are out there are generally worthless. The libertarians are, of course, just Austrian school fanatics, corporatists. The Greens are essentially communists. So we can drop that if you so desire. So what we're trying to do is take advantage of every method we have of resistance. And if that involves sabotaging the Democratic Party, then we can sabotage the Democratic Party. And I think it's a good idea. Now, let's go on to the Syrian situation, because there's a lot of stuff that we need to cover here. And one of the things I want to discuss is this idea of a ceasefire. We have a ceasefire meeting, a ceasefire agreement, actually, between diplomats in Munich that agreed on this past Friday to a cessation of hostilities in Syria. Now, John Kerry announced that agreement after his meeting with Sergei Lavrov, and the goal is to have a ceasefire within a week's time. Now, a lot is being made about the ceasefire deal, and I think we really need to look at it, right? The ceasefire, the terms of the ceasefire is that the ceasefire is not going to include the Islamic State. It's not going to include al-Nusra, and I assume that it's not supposed to include al-Qaeda. I think that's implied as well, but it's not specifically stated. Russia and the United States, of course, are both conducting bombing campaigns inside Syria. Russia is bombing terrorists. The United States is bombing Syrian civilian infrastructure, Syrian military positions, and so forth in the desert, or nothing at all. Now, the agreement between the two, the United States has stated that it would continue its air campaign against what they're saying is terrorist groups in Syria, but of course we know that's the Syrian military. That is civilians. It's certainly not terrorists. And the Russians are also saying they're not going to stop their bombing campaign. So a lot of this is in question, right? Technically, according to the ceasefire agreement, attacks can be made on ISIS, but they couldn't be made on something like the Free Syrian Army, moderate terrorists. And there's no definition of moderate terrorists. There's definitions that are different for each country, right? Russia has a different definition of moderate terrorist than the United States does, and in Syria, the Syrian government has a different definition of that term than either of those governments. So the question is, how relevant is this ceasefire agreement going to be? If ISIS and Al-Qaeda aren't included in the ceasefire agreement, if the Russians aren't going to stop bombing moderate rebels, according to the United States, then how is this ceasefire going to begin? How is it going to take hold? The United States is going to claim that Russia is violating the ceasefire agreement on day one because they bombed Jaish al-Islam, a terrorist group that the United States is fine with. If the United States bombs the Syrian military, then the Russians will say that the United States violated the ceasefire agreement. If the Syrian government attacks any of these pet terrorists supported by the United States, then the United States is going to claim that this is a violation because they attacked moderate rebels. Doesn't seem likely that the ceasefire is going to hold, to be honest. This is something that's probably not going to work out. It might work out for the first day or two, but we're going to see, I think, a resurgence in fighting. So the question now, though, is why? Why a peace agreement now in mid-February 2016? Well, the pattern is almost unmistakable for anybody that has any adequate attention span here. It's when the terrorists are gaining ground, the calls from NATO are, Assad must go, Assad must go. When the terrorists, when the SAA is gaining ground, the Syrian Arab Army, there's this chorus that is calling for a ceasefire. So when the terrorists are winning, it's Assad must go. When the Syrian military is winning, it's calling for peace and for a ceasefire. So we've seen the Syrian military make immense gains all across Syria, and I should have mentioned this earlier. This is we tend to focus on negative news sometimes. There's positive news happening in Syria right now, and that is, for one thing, that the Syrian military has made incredible gains all across the country, right? So with all of this happening, I mean, just take a look at it. The terrorists are all but surrounded in the largest city in Syria, Aleppo, right? It's only a matter of time before they just cease to exist there as a relevant fighting force. Latakia province is almost entirely liberated. The border with Jordan is virtually sealed. The Turkish border is in the process of being sealed, and the Jarablus corridor that we've been demanding be sealed here on this show, apparently someone is listening, because it's slowly being shut now. Even Raqqa, which is the terrorist stronghold in Syria, is now being assaulted by the Syrian military and the Russian Air Force. So with that being said, John Kerry and his group wants a ceasefire. Well, of course they want a ceasefire. Of course they want peace. Their deck of cards has got a lot fewer aces lately. It's hardly believable that, since it was the U.S. and NATO and Israel and Turkey and the GCC, since they're responsible for the Syrian crisis to begin with, we cannot believe with any reasonable justification that they actually want peace. Remember, we have the quote from Patrick Henry, "Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace." And we know that John Kerry is nothing He's certainly not a gentleman, and we know that for a fact. And the country that he represents is now reminiscent of the imperialist British Empire, much more reminiscent of that than the context in which Patrick Henry uttered his famous words. And let's be clear, Kerry's not calling for peace. He's calling for the destruction of an entire people and their way of life, and for the annihilation of their secular government in favor of some type of puppet regime as a first choice, or in second choice, some type of impotent jihadist state as a consolation prize. Peace is only the cover story designed to allow jihadist savages breathing room to regroup and launch yet another assault on the Syrian people. So it's the Syrian people and the Syrian military who are in the position of being the country now that the world is watching to see whether or not a small population of proud, resistant people are able to resist the onslaught of some powerful conglomerate of nations that are determined to destroy it and to destroy them. It's Syria that represents a true resistance to imperialism now. So John Kerry can call for his phony peace all he wants, but he knows that these terrorist days are now numbered there in Syria. And even while his press conferences call for ceasefires, and he talks to his counterparts in Russia about ceasefires, the terrorists are on their radios right now calling for emergency assistance because they know their time is short as well. So we're 5 years on, and the Syrian people, along with the military, have demonstrated that their determination and their refusal to submit to these foreign demands are as powerful an idea as the desire held by the Western powers to impart and impose their will on them. So it's to finish the Patrick Henry quote, I guess we could say it's the Syrian people who are now uttering that quote, right? It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why do we stand here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry said that in 1775, and if he was right now as he was then, that the battle is not to the strong alone, but to the vigilant, the active, and the brave, we are soon to see an acknowledgement from the United States that the invasion of Syria has failed. It was a failure, and we should see a geopolitical retreat by NATO and the elimination of the terrorist contingent in Syria soon enough. And while we are, of course, aware that NATO and its allies are not completely out of tricks, we've got to encourage the Syrian people and the Syrian government to stay strong in this fight, because the fate of the world, not just Syria, but the fate of the world lies within its borders. Because if NATO can destroy Syria, it's going to move on to Iran, and then on from Iran to Russia, and a war that will involve us all. So we wish Syria victory in this fight against imperialism and terrorism. And of course we wish the NATO powers clarity and wisdom to realize the error of their ways before it's too late for all of us. So Kerry can have his phony peace, and we're going to look for real solutions to this situation. Now, I want to address something that I did not have a chance to go over some time ago in regards to Syria, and this has to do with non-governmental organizations like Avaaz. Now, it's considered one of the globe's largest NGOs. The odds are that most Americans probably haven't ever heard of it. And Avaaz, which apparently its name means voice in a number of different languages, is a massive online activist organization. That's how it describes itself. And it claims that it promotes freedom and democracy, of course, all over the world, in a variety of different means and for a variety of different causes. Its own website and it was created in 2007. The organization, not the website. But the Avaaz says its mission is to, quote, organize citizens of all nations to close the gap between the world we have and the world most people everywhere want, end quote. It also says this. This is from its own website. Avaaz empowers millions of people from all walks of life to take action on pressing global, regional, and national issues, from corruption and poverty to conflict and climate change. Our model of internet organizing allows thousands of individual efforts, however small, to be rapidly combined into a powerful collective force. The Avaaz community campaigns in 15 languages, served by a core team on 6 continents and thousands of volunteers. We take action, signing petitions, funding media campaigns and direct actions, emailing, calling and lobbying governments, and organizing offline protests and events to ensure that the views and values of the world's people inform the decisions that affect us all. While Avaaz's stated goals might sound laudable, here, well, let's see. All right, so that's in the quote. Now, again, anybody that's observed the number of people power revolutions in Eastern Europe and the Middle East over the last few decades might recognize the language that Avaaz is using here, at least on its website, as indicative of the color revolution apparatus that helped inflame the world over the last 5 to 7 years. Avaaz is part of that color revolution apparatus, and it's apparently received funds from George Soros and its Open Society foundations to start up back in 2007. Avaaz was founded by Res Publica and MoveOn.org, and they're both Soros-funded organizations that attempted to co-opt the American left into supporting ideas and campaigns that are closely associated with the communitarian foundation oligarchs. Now, let's look at the Avaaz players here. The number of Avaaz founders and board members have close connections to Soros's Open Society foundations, like Eli Pariser, who's both a board member of OSF and a member of the Open Society U.S. programs, as well as a member of MoveOn.org. They've got Pedro Abramove, who's the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean at OSF, also the director of Latin America programs at OSF, and a campaign director of Avaaz. We've got the conservative organization Discover the Networks had published a summary of the connections between some of these founders of Avaaz, and this is what we've got here. We've got Rikin Patel. He's Canadian. He's the executive director of Res Publica and the president and executive director of Avaaz. Eli Pariser, again, executive director of MoveOn.org. He's the Avaaz board chairman, serves on the advisory board of Res Publica. Tom Perriello, former U.S. congressman from Virginia, co-founded Res Publica, has been a longtime advocacy partner with Rikin Patel. Ben Branzel, former advocacy director for MoveOn.org. He also served as director of new media campaigns and fundraising for Obama's Organizing for America. He also worked for the presidential campaigns of Howard Dean and John Edwards. So that's just a few of them. But as you might suspect, despite constant rhetoric regarding human rights and freedom and democracy, Avaaz has openly supported violence, openly supported war, openly supported imperialism. In fact, in 2011, Avaaz raised its voice as loudly as it could, as it likes to do, with demands that the EU, NATO, and the UN and all other parties stop the violent crackdown on civilians in Libya. What that means, of course, is that Avaaz called on the EU, on NATO, on the UN, and all other interested parties to come to the rescue of jihadists that had been unleashed against the government and the people of Libya in order to overthrow Gaddafi for the benefit of the NATO powers. Now, let's move on to its Syria campaign, right? So soon after what it did in Libya, it turned its sights on Syria. And that, of course, was the country that was next in line to suffer under NATO's attempt to destroy an uncooperative national government. So as a sampling of this drivel that Avaaz regularly released regarding Syria, Avaaz posted on its website this transparent propaganda in an attempt to drum up support for a no-fly zone in Syria. This is what it says. Quote, "It's inspiring. Over 1 million people from across the world have joined the call to protect Syrian civilians. And an Avaaz Commission poll shows a majority of Americans supporting a targeted no-fly zone to save lives. Right now, the U.S. Congress and the UN are talking about how to protect Syrian civilians. Let's keep the pressure on for life-saving action. The Syrian Air Force just dropped chlorine gas bombs on children. Their little bodies gasped for air on hospital stretchers as medics held back tears and watched as they suffocated to death. But today there is a chance to stop these barrel bomb murderers with the targeted no-fly zone. The U.S., Turkey, UK, France, and others are right now seriously considering a safe zone in North Syria. Advisors close to President Obama support it. That's Hillary Clinton. But he is worried he won't have public support. That's where we come in. Let's tell him we don't want a world that just watches as a dictator drops chemical weapons on families in the night. We want action. One humanitarian worker said, "I wish the world could see what I have seen with my eyes. It breaks your heart forever. Let us show that the world cares. Signed to support a life-saving no-fly zone." A life-saving no-fly zone. Oh, my God. Anyway, somebody should, looks like somebody took a few too many poetry classes in college that wrote this press report, but still, that's what they have on the Avaaz website. So the purpose of that post was obviously to drum up support for a no-fly zone, in case you didn't notice, in Syria, which of course is tantamount to a direct military invasion of the country on the model of that which destroyed Libya, right, and returned the country to years shortly prior to the Stone Age. So that's even been admitted by top U.S. generals when they explained exactly what a no-fly zone would entail, right? We had General Carter Ham, and certainly no fan of his. It says, this is what Carter Ham says, quote, "We should make no bones about it. It first entails killing a lot of people and destroying the Syrian air defenses and those people who are manning those systems. And then it entails destroying the Syrian Air Force, preferably on the ground, in the air if necessary. This is a violent combat action that results in lots of casualties and increased risk to our own personnel." And we've also got General Philip Breedlove, a person of which we are also not a fan. And this is what he says. "I know it sounds stark, but what I also tell people, or always tell people when they talk to me about a no-fly zone is, it's basically to start a war with that country because you're going to have to go in and kinetically take out the air defense's capability," end quote. So there you see. Avaaz calls for war. Peace, freedom, and democracy wants war, violence, and death. Well, that should be open for everybody to see there. Now, there's that glaringly false claim that Assad's troops dropped chemical weapons on Syrian civilians. Remember, the Syrian military has never been implicated in using chemical weapons against the Syrian people, except in the pages of Western mainstream press and the minds of a gullible public who's barely awake. Now, every use of chemical weapons has at some point been traced back to the Western-backed terrorists fighting against the Syrian government. Every single one. Avaaz also pushed, remember, for relocating Syrian refugees, and I guess we should put in quotes Syrian refugees, just the real Syrian refugees and the other Syrian refugees to England as a result of these chlorine bombs falling from the sky in Syria. It used these non-existent chlorine bombs that fall from the sky to justify relocating these quote-unquote refugees from a war zone that it is itself partly responsible for creating. So we've also got from Avaaz these dubious calls for help from Syrians, like this one that was on the website, "Cry for Help in Syria." It's allegedly came from Homs, and it says, of course, well, we won't go through all that, but obviously most Syrians are horrified at the state of war that their country is in as a result of the Western destabilization, but the overwhelming majority of Syrians support their government and despise Western-backed savages who are raping and beheading their way across the country. If you're interested in reading or listening to the opinion of a real Syrian in Syria, then I would encourage you to go to YouTube, go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and search Afra Dagher, Afraadagher. She is a Syrian living in Syria, and she's a true victim of this so-called civil war that would be more aptly named an invasion. And she's in Syria, and she can tell you what's happening. She's done interviews with me here on this show. We've done videos together. She's got a number of articles that I posted up on my website. And if you want to hear a real Syrian talk about what's happening in Syria, please be my guest. Go to the website and look her up. I would also encourage you, if you're interested in Avaaz itself, there's an article, a good article by Vanessa Beeley entitled "The Propaganda War Against Syria Led by Avaaz and the White Helmets." And she is discussing the Avaaz propaganda that emerged in the wake of the Russian attacks against ISIS and other related terrorists in Syria. Now, we should point out that Avaaz has and continues to follow the State Department and the NATO line that Russia was bombing these as of yet undiscovered moderate rebels that nobody's ever been actually able to produce. Now, there seems to be a triad right here, the usual triad of human rights organizations, and Avaaz is one of them. We've also got these white helmets, and we've got Human Rights Watch. We've got, at one point, we had Avaaz producing some of its most misleading petitions, and using eyewitness statements, and these are quote-unquote eyewitness statements. These are things that are generally produced out of thin air, claiming that Russia targeted civilian areas that were free of ISIS operatives. That makes no sense whatsoever. You watch the videos, for instance, and particularly the longer live leak versions of the videos that Human Rights Watch and Avaaz and the White Helmets were talking about. It's hard to detect the women and children that are being described because they're saying that women and children are being attacked. Well, there don't seem to be any. The majority of the people appear to be male and of fighting age, much like a lot of the refugees that are popping in to Europe right now. And we certainly have something to say about that as well. So there's no evidence of civilian life among these deserted buildings. The only movement that you can see is of males, some on foot, some on scooters, some taking the time to film the events, even as the bombs are falling, of course. Not typically the action of terrified civilians or innocent civilians. There is one video that they produced that shows about 2 seconds of a young boy crying and obviously injured, but that video has to be questioned in terms of its authenticity because the claims that the initial shot of the planes overhead is not even of Russian planes. The quality of the video is poor. It's apart from the footage of the one child. Again, it shows that the majority of the people involved are men of fighting age in a deserted building in the northern area of Homs. So it's a disgusting display of blatant propaganda calling for this no-fly zone. We even had Emma Ruby Sachs, the deputy director of Avaaz, making this statement that, quote, Russia says it's bombing ISIS, but eyewitnesses say their brutal attacks targeted areas way outside of ISIS control. This will only sow instability and radicalization and should be an urgent wake-up call to the U.S. and its allies to enforce a targeted no-fly zone to save lives, counter ISIS, and alleviate the refugee crisis. Syrian civilians need protection now, not further attacks from Russian bombs. End quote. Vanessa Beeley, in that article that I just mentioned, she actually contacted somebody in Damascus and asked them for their opinion on that statement. And this is what he said, quote, I am just relieved that the Russian Air Force is in action. Well, I guess the Syrians disagree with the people who aren't in Syria about what should happen in Syria. And I guess we should go with the Syrians on that, shouldn't we? So it's a hypocrisy of Ruby Sachs. It mirrors the hypocrisy of Congress and Obama and the State Department and NATO in general. We won't go through some of Obama's speeches. His star is starting to fade. If we want to talk about civilian casualties, though, we might want to turn the spotlight on the coalition bombing campaign. Remember, the civilian death rates from these strikes hardly ever discussed, and it's often concealed by the Pentagon and the U.S. and European associated analysts like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, some guy, some traitor from Syria living in England with the internet, and that is all that he's bringing to the table. You want statistics? He's got statistics. He can make them up. Whatever you want him to say, whatever the State Department wants him to say, or the MI6 wants him to say, he can say it very easily. He just creates it online. He needs an eyewitness to say something. Well, then he creates an eyewitness. This is how the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights works. It's not an observatory. It's a guy on the internet who gets money from European governments, by the way. But he won't say which one, and it hasn't been reported which one. Doesn't matter. They're in NATO, so he's getting money from NATO. So where was the Avaaz petition calling for a no-fly zone when the coalition airstrikes resulted in a number of non-combatant deaths, including children? And that's not really debatable because it's there. You can go read from Air Wars the numbers of those bombing campaigns. We've also seen a troubling mass casualty event, number of mass casualty events that are attributed to the coalition actions, right? The first night of the bombing on September 23rd of 2014, we had U.S. aircraft killing about 15 civilians in Kafar Daryan. On December 28th, we had 58 civilians killed when the coalition struck Al-Bab. And then, of course, April 30th of 2015, 64 civilians in a coalition airstrike at Baramali. All right, these 3 incidents alone have 106 non-combatant victims, publicly named, 38 of them children. So have we investigated any of that, Avaaz? Where is the no-fly zone to keep NATO out? So that just shows you the hypocrisy of that propaganda. Now, it's not just involved in the propaganda side of the war on national sovereignty and on in the favor of British not British imperialism, but Western imperialism, the people living in the countries against the people living in the countries resisting Anglo-American domination. It's also been directly involved on the ground, particularly in Syria, in attempts to facilitate this so-called Arab Spring, right? This color revolution and other forms of what they deem Syrian activism. Anytime you hear activists say, you can translate that to mean terrorists say. That is not an activist, that's a terrorist that's telling you that. And we can look into this briefly about the association that Avaaz has with the destabilization. It was instrumental in not only providing the online propaganda supporting the terrorist and color revolution participants in Syria back home and in the West, but it was also helpful in providing material support like technology, propaganda, tech training, medical supplies to the terrorists on the ground, that sort of thing. We even have an article, Avaaz faces questions over role at center of Syrian protest movement, that was written by Ed Pilkington for The Guardian in March 2012. And this is what he has to say. Syria has certainly been risky. The group was quicker on the draw in responding to, he's talking about Avaaz, in responding to the first signs of the protest movement than most aid organizations, even than most media outlets that pride themselves in getting speedily to difficult places. To begin with, Avaaz sent a team of staff organizers to Lebanon after spotting the first signs of a nascent protest movement in Syria. Contact was then made with Syrian activists, terrorists inside the country, and go-betweens recruited, notably Wissam Tarif, a highly respected Syrian pro-democracy leader, terrorist, who is widely consulted by journalists and senior Western diplomats. And just to interrupt Pilkington here, I want to say that people like Tarif, while they may be either terrorists, they also could be these type of limousine terrorists, right? These nice propaganda figures that are paid for by the State Department or intelligence agencies to represent the invading forces as a sort of more moderate, palatable figure. So, back to Pilkington. From there, its involvement in the Syrian Arab Spring drew it steadily further and further into the conflict. First off, Avaaz sent in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of communications equipment, satellite phones, and internet connections known as BGANs that gave the protesters a link to the outside world. Typical color revolution strategy. Go read my book, The Road to Damascus, the Anglo-American Assault on Syria, and you'll see that this is the kind of typical methodology. Now, Pilkington, as with earlier Arab Spring engagements in Tunisia and Libya, they realized that equipment alone was not enough. The protesters needed to know how to use it if they were to be effective. So Avaaz sent in trainers who could give grounding in how to use the smartphones as well as basic training in citizen journalism. Verification was a key element, says Patel. We could get that stuff out, but the media didn't know what they were looking at or couldn't be sure where it had come from. So we began playing the middleman, verifying information. That was in some ways the greatest value we brought to maintaining the oxygen of international attention on these protest movements. Reports coming from Avaaz-trained citizen journalists in Homs and other key conflict zones channeled through the Avaaz communications hub outside the country has been a major source of information on the uprising and the regime's bloody response used by news outlets across the world. So they're telling you how this works, right? They give the communications to the so-called rebels, who then take selective videos, selective propaganda statements. They pretty much say whatever they want, and then the media takes that. They're coached in that from organizations and NGOs like Avaaz. They take that information and disseminate it amongst the general population and create a narrative. Okay, so that's how that's working. Getting in the equipment involved opening up smuggling routes across the Syrian border into hotbeds such as Homs and its most badly bombed neighborhood, Baba Amr, which led Avaaz seamlessly into the next phase of its engagement. While the smuggling routes open, it could help get $2 million of blood bags, tetanus shots, respiratory machines, and other medical supplies into the country, bringing relief to communities that were desperate for help and that more establishment institutions like the ICRC had failed to reach. It has also smuggled 34 international journalists into the troubled zones. Marie Colvin, the Sunday Times journalist, entered using another conduit, but the French photographer Rémi Ochlik, who died with her as a result of the Syrian government shelling, was helped by Avaaz, right? So that's in quote. That's Pilkington. But remember, we can now put Avaaz amongst other treacherous company like Doctors Without Borders, the White Helmets, Human Rights Watch, and even Amnesty International. We've dealt with them in the past as well. So at the end of the day, it's just one more tentacle of the color revolution octopus, really, that's partially funded by George Soros, the U.S. State Department, the CIA, and the budgets of other NATO countries that are above and below publicly available knowledge. Its worldwide internet organization is nothing more than a hub for dupes and witless participants who are disenchanted with the current system for whatever reason, some justified, some not. And the human mass is then used as a battering ram against the target government, right? Ushering in a system that's almost always worse than the one that they helped overthrow. So there's no shortage of color revolutions in Syria or anywhere else in the world. So if we compiled a list of the organizations that currently exist that facilitate these types of things, it would require a full-time commitment, even as new groups are formed all the time. So it's not necessarily the individual organization that has to be exposed, but the methods by which color revolutions and mass movements are created and facilitated and accomplished that need to be understood. So once we understand the nature of the color revolution and destabilization, we can prevent such tragedies from happening in the future. Now, we don't have much time left. Actually, we're at the end of the show. We don't have the ability to cover anything else this week, but we're going to get into a lot of other things next week, possibly talking about the demands that we want to see, since we're in the general election, well, not the general election, but we're in the primary phase of the American election. So it's time to get out demands while people are actually paying attention to politics. So we'll probably talk about that next week. Ladies and gentlemen, please tune in next week. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
Visit pigminenews.com and to subscribe, youtube.com.